All right, we're going to continue on in our quest to redo all the wooden trim in this car. We've got some peeling there, peeling here, peeling there, delamination here, separation of the wood veneer from the aluminum, and from the aluminum from the wooden substrate. So first thing we have to do, open the glove box, remove this liner, get these Venetian blinds out. The service manual comically calls these Venetian blinds. Okay, I'll go along with that. There are releases on either side here. Once we get this out and the blind out, we can get to the screws that are inside to remove this wood trim from the dash. All right, so we're going to get busy. Okay, glove box liner is out. Keep in mind you have this clip on the top of the liner, all right? And you've got to move the top of the liner down a little bit and get it past this center part right here. And I've also removed the metal part of the latching mechanism. So, all right, to get the Venetian blinds out, you'll see this metal clip right here. And my screwdriver is going to go underneath it. Right? Pry it out a little bit. And there's one on the other side as well. Alright, so you can just use one small screwdriver. You pry that clip up a little bit and pull while you're doing that and get it moved a little bit. Do the same thing on the other side. Now I believe we should be loose enough to go ahead and remove this Venetian blind, as they call it. Looks like the clip slipped back into place there. So I need to get back underneath there. Yeah, so, two hands, one with a little screwdriver and one to pull on the vent. I will say this little vent is very substantial. It's quite heavy. It's really impressive. It's heavy duty. This was meant to be serviced, as are nearly all things on this car. So, all right, that's really neat. Let's move on. There are some screws to deal with. Now look at that. There's a threaded shaft on the right-hand side, but it does not have a nut on it. Somebody has been in here before. There's a threaded shaft on the back side of this trim piece, and it goes through the dash, and then there's a nut on the back side. I can reach my hand back in there and find it. You know what? I'm going to try to video it and see what happens here. Not sure if anybody can see that, but we'll find out when I do the editing. But anyway, I'm going to get back in there with this 1/4 inch drive, and I believe it's a 7. I'm going to try this 7 first and see how that works out. So this is fairly loose. What I've got, I put the wrench down because it was getting in the way, because it's butting up against the vent pipe. And so I'm going to use this small extension, and I think that will be enough to get that nut off there. I think we're making progress. Let's see, we don't want to drop it. Do we get it out? Nope. Must be still on there. Yeah, it's hanging on by a thread. I got my fingers on it. Yay, look at that. Cool. All right. I love me some progress. All right, you can see that. Uh-oh, what was that? Something dropped down. Got to be careful when you're doing this stuff. You drop parts and then you're lost. All right, so that's a backing plate of some sort. All right, so let's put that in our stash right over here. We'll figure out where that goes later. All right, we got it off of there. This is what the back side of it looks like. There is one threaded shaft on the right end. It goes through that hole right there. There's one on the left side here, and it apparently goes through there. I don't see a separate hole just a little bit of insulation there. I guess it's just a big enough, there's a big enough gap there. It doesn't really need a hole in the dashboard for that. So, okay. And there, I took this screw out, but apparently there was no need in it. All right, so, hey, at least we accomplished our goal here. That's what we wanted to do, was get this thing off the car, and let's get busy restoring this piece of trim. Let's move over to the workbench. All right, we're back to our old friend, the heat gun. I'm going to start by trying to remove this piece of veneer on the end first. And we'll just see how it goes. Actually, with a little applied heat, the veneer closed back up. But as it cools off, it goes back that way. So that tells me that this coating, that as it heats up, it gets more flexible and will allow the wood, I think the wood wants to pull back this way, and I think the coating is shrunk and it wants to pull back that way. So you've got a battle going on. That is what's causing all these problems with this trim. So all right, a little update here. So we've been working to get this end piece off of this end piece of veneer off of the wood trim. There is a screw embedded in the wood veneer right there. This is the screw in the side of it that holds it on the dash, and I can actually turn that. So what we'll need to do is get in there with some JB Weld and fill that in so that that will not turn when we put this back on the car. So that tells me why this nut was missing. Somebody has been in this dashboard before, and this nut was missing when I tried to take this off. They probably didn't bother to put it back on because this was turning inside there. But I think we can fix that little problem. So up next, I'm going to continue on with the heat gun. I'm going to pull off this outer layer of veneer next. I'll just apply heat and slowly pry that off. And then we'll move on and we'll remove the aluminum piece as well. And we'll take this down as far as we need to before we start to re-glue everything. So we'll show you more here just shortly. All right, a little bit at a time, and there you have it. Using a little razor blade there and the heat gun, and you have to go really slow. So heat a little, pry a little, heat a little, pry a little. That's what you get. So that popped right off there. So more on this just shortly. Next thing we're gonna get the heat gun and the razor blade, and we'll get this aluminum off here and see what the inner part of this thing looks like. All right, aluminum is off. That didn't take a whole lot of work, really. So the process of cleaning up this inner piece and then gluing it back together is going to begin. So I guess I'll start with sanding this surface down, removing this excess lacquer coating, and then I will tighten up these joints right here with some tight bond. Same thing back here on this end. We'll get the substrate or the foundation nice and tight and secure before we start reassembly. You'll note that the black plastic trim that goes around the Venetian blinds is affixed to the inner wood with a couple of staples here. And there's one staple over here. It seems to be, maybe it was never in there good to begin with, or it's pushed out over the years. Not sure about that. Probably push that in before we start re-gluing. So, all right, so next up, I'm going to start sanding. And we're going to begin the process of getting this thing, back to its old glory. Mercedes-Benz. And there is your part number right there. What is that? 126.685.00.18. And what do we have over here? We have a sticker of some sort. 2094, or is that 4294? Maybe that was the person who assembled this part. Unknown. Well, anyway, let's start sanding and start getting this thing put back together. All right, couldn't leave well enough alone. So I decided to dismantle the entire thing. This is basically video documentation on how this goes. So we got this piece here. What we have is, it's not really a veneer. I guess it is. It's an inner veneer, if you want to call it that. And it goes over the base, and this base is in multiple pieces apparently. Whether or not that's supposed to be multiple pieces, I don't know. But you got this coming across here, and there's a break there, and there's a break there. So we're going to separate the veneer, this veneer piece from those bases. And this plastic bit was glued pretty heavily right in there, so I had to separate that. And the plastic bit had staples through it. Had one here, 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 and back there. All right, so this is the end piece. I guess I'll work on this next. I think this plastic bit should, yep, there we go, should just come right out of there. So that's pretty cool. Okay, that's doable. See there's where your plastic bit went up in there. And all right, well, we're going to continue on here. I'm not sure. I'll probably just take this thing down to its bare pieces. But I don't know. Maybe I'll stop here at this piece. This one looks pretty good. All right, I've been cleaning up the end piece. You'll note the curvature of this piece and the curvature of the end cap. They don't really match. And what I initially thought was a piece of broken veneer, it looks like it's simply a piece of filler that someone cut off at the factory when they were making this thing. And it sets right in there and fills in this gap. It wasn't connected to anything else. It was just sitting in there like that. So I'll have to either reuse it or maybe improvise with JB Weld. Anyway, so this piece here is pretty solid. I don't know that I'll be doing anything to it. The glue joints for the end caps appear to be pretty good. So, all right, more on this later. All right, step number 1 for the reassembly process. We're going to reattach the end of the inner layer of veneer to the inner wood base right here. And I'm just going to use tight bond and a vice grip and a little block of wood there. Now when you do this, you want to make sure you get the glue all throughout the joint. So you put the glue in one side and then mash it in with another little thin sliver of wood or something until it oozes out the other side. And then you know you're all the way through, and then you can clamp it down. So we'll leave this for several hours before we tackle this part right here. So this is going to sit for a little while before we can carry on. All right, while the inner base is gluing up with string wrapped around it, I'm going to work on the outside veneer. I just got through using the heat gun and a razor to scrape off the bulk of the glopped on glue that was put on there originally, or that might have been from a previous owner. I don't really know. This looks like remnants of glue left behind by hands that tried to re-glue it to the car. I think that's what that is, because you can't wipe it off. So I'll need to sand this down and clean up the backside. It'll look good when we're done, just like the other pieces. So more later. All right, I've got the top veneer sanded down with a first initial sanding with some 100 grit, or what is that? That's 120. Anyway, I got the glue off of the back, got it all smoothed up, so any new adhesives that we put on there, that's going to work out real good. Got the top nice and smooth, got all those old nasty glue fingerprints off, and this is going to be, we're going to hit this with some 600 grit, probably do a little water sanding on it, a little wet sanding, and then after that a little light coat of stain, and then followed up by some polyurethane once we get this all glued up. All right, we've got this inner piece all glued up, and I just got through clipping off the strings. So up next I'm going to sand this thing down, And then I think we're probably in a position to start reassembly. So let me sand this thing down and we'll continue on. All right, end result, we've got the JB Weld. It's all dried now, and we used the little, I use this little thing here to remove all the strings, and I got a little die grinder here that I can regulate the speed quite well. Actually, if you just hit it real easy like that, you can be gentle with it. Got all the JB Weld sanded down up in there, up in the corners and all that. And there's some left in there, but it's smoothed out. It's sort of at the contour of that bend there, so I'm not going to worry about that. All right, well, there you have it. We've got the outside veneer JB welded up to the inner aluminum and wooden core. And we've got our good old friend, the string, holding everything together. And we started off with one rubber band there just to get a foothold. So we're going to let this dry for a whole day, and then we'll continue with our reassembly. All right, there's the first pass with some 120 grit, followed up with the die grinder to get all the heavy JB Weld and string off and get this thing cleaned up front and back. And it's really solid now, very well held together with all the different layers. You got the original wood layer, then you've got the aluminum, and then actually your original wood layer, an inner veneer, a layer of aluminum, and an outer veneer. It's very, very rigid now. So, okay, up next we're going to JB Weld this side piece onto the main front piece. We're going to get a good portion of JB Weld here in this joint and right there in that little corner. And we'll position this guy right in here. This piece here will have to bend slightly to follow the contour of this piece. As long as we get the top and the bottom and the sides lined up, we can clamp either end and it will be nice and tight. All right, this gnarly looking monstrosity here is the last major glue up for this right hand side piece of corner trim. This is the, let's see, the left-hand side that goes toward the driver's side of the car. And we had already glued on this part, the end cap piece. I guess I'll call it the end cap piece. But right now, what we got going on is the last piece of veneer. We're reattaching that. Got vice grips, a little wooden shim holding the veneer against this wood backing plate, and same here with this large C-clamp holding the bottom part. And I've just got this pair of vice grips here holding this thing to the bench to keep the whole thing from toppling over into the floor. We're gonna let this dry until tomorrow sometime, and then we'll take it apart and see what the damage is and do some more sanding and do some staining. All right, we've got our clamps off of the piece here, and we were gluing on this end piece of veneer. You'll note some remnants of the rubber bands and the JB Weld and so on and so forth, but I think we can handle this. And we're going to get after this with some sandpaper. We're going to start cleaning this thing up and getting it ready for stain. All right, there's an initial sanding with some 120 grit. This whole end right here, it looks pretty rough, but I think it'll be all right. Once we get a little stain on here and some polyurethane, it should clean up pretty nice. Got this thing really smooth with some 120. I think I'll hit it with some 600 probably, and then we'll go ahead and start staining and polyurethaning, and I'm anxious to get this thing back on the car and dig into another piece of trim. All right, we're all done. We're ready to get this guy back on the car. We have applied 3 layers of stain and 4 or 5 layers of high gloss polyurethane. In between the layers of polyurethane, we did a wet sand with 600 grit paper. On the back side, the nasty side, you'll note the plastic liner strip here that the air conditioning vent rides against. It was originally stapled into place, and you can see it had these 4 staples here. Now I put those staples back in their original holes and lined those holes up so that everything would fit on the car well. I put a little JB Weld on the staples to keep them in place. Alright, enough about all that. I'm really happy with the way this guy turned out. One other minor item, I have to find a nut for this little guy right here, and I'm going to rummage around in my stash and find that, and then we're going to put this back on the car, and it should not take long at all. Cross your fingers. All right, we're ready to go. We're going to slip this guy in here from the right, get these shafts back into the hole, and get it tightened down, get the AC vent back in place, and we're going to wrap up this video. All right, it took a little bit of effort, but we got it back in there. This is not an exact fit by any means. You will have to fiddle with it until you get it just right. Okay, so keep that in mind. I did have to trim this inner piece of plastic down here on the end because it has to fit around this piece. This piece goes between here. Just a few little tricks to get it to fit just right, but we can get our nut on that shaft back there, and we can get our second nut back here. So we're going to get this thing tightened down and get our AC vent back in. Okay, we've been making progress. We got this nut started by hand on the back side of this threaded shaft back here. It's a bit tricky. You can't really get it started with a wrench. You have to put the nut on in the tips of your fingers. Let's see if I can't record that back there. And get it started with the tips of your fingers, and then you can get back in there with something similar to this and tighten it up. So, all right, we're going to finish up. All right, to get this nut back in this hole right here, instead of boring that hole out, which would be extremely difficult and destructive, I modified a cheap socket to get up in there and do the job. So we got that tightened down as good as it needs to be, or at least as good as I can get it anyway. It's not going anywhere. That thing's tight as a drum. Okay, let's get this AC vent in here and finish up. All right, just one last step. There we are, folks. We have the right side corner wood trim on the dash fully restored and back in place with a functioning air conditioning vent. Left, right, up and down, so on and so forth. Glove box is good to go as well. And you know what? I'm pretty happy with this. This piece of trim is solid as a rock. No annoying delamination that will never come loose again. I think it turned out really, really well. As always, I appreciate you guys stopping by my channel, so please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll continue on in the restoration of our W126. See you later.